We had thought them weak, constantly fighting among themselves, drawing imaginary lines between different groups of their own species, constantly vying to control or destroy each other just to get ahead. Only 6 star systems controlled, not even fully either. Some of them were simply colonized or being utilized for mining. So we attacked them, as we are wont to do to weaker species. They drew back within themselves like a threatened animal pack always does, coming together to make themselves harder to find, but stronger when they attack. Many do this when we attack. It brought them time, but not enough. We cleansed their planets of all sentient life, fragmented those worlds that fought too hard. It wasn't even difficult. Only 6 systems, not even fully settled. Easy. After it was done, after the homeworld was turned into a smudge of asteroids in their star's gravity well, we celebrated, began converting their remaining worlds into livable environments for our kind. One more species destroyed, so that we might expand, ever coreward. But we were wrong to think them eradicated. The first hint was the trails of ion drive signatures leading out of their home system, heading every direction. We had foolishly assumed they were simply vermin escaping a burning home, or messengers sending for help. But no help arrived. And when we followed those trails, they led not to nomadic escape fleets, or newly built habitats trying to rebuild. No. Instead they led down false directions, seeming to fade to nothing. They doubled back on themselves, or looped around systems nonsensically. Some led straight into stars, or even black holes. Every now and then they would lead to wreckage that couldn't have supported more than 1 or 2 of them, but the trails never led to any survivors. So then we assumed that they were just some kind of last-minute gambit that hadn't paid off. We were wrong then, too. It started nearly 15.3 years after we had cleared their system, and it made no sense at all. People began disappearing, never more than 2 or 3 at a time, never where anyone could witness what was happening. Sometimes an article of clothing, or a belonging that had been dropped, would be found where it would happen, but not often. Usually the people just disappeared without a trace. Then supply barges began to vanish, and their defensive escorts with them. They would deploy for their assigned route, but they would never reach the other end of it. Sometimes wreckage was found, sometimes even an escape pod, but never a survivor. Crops and livestock were next. Whole agricultural plants would become tainted by disease. Crops would wither, livestock would grow sick and die, lakes and oceans would become toxic and destroy our filtration facilities. These attacks seemed to happen all over our controlled territory, almost simultaneously, and still no traces of who or what was doing it. Our people began to starve. Emergency farming directorates were put in place. But the damage was expected to still number in billions of lives, and numerous planetary systems needing to be abandoned. Then those ships disappeared too. Our high command began to meet resistance and criticism from the planetary governors and sector lords. More ships disappeared. More planets began to die. Our government began to send envoys to rival civilizations, those we hadn't seen as weak, or who had proven too strong to be beaten. We inquired as to the origin of these attacks, this sabotage. They all denied their fault. We had expected as much. Then our envoys began to disappear. Only this time there was a trace of what happened. In fact, the attackers didn't even hide. Many of the envoys died violent, grotesque deaths. Oftentimes it occurred in public, or if it didn't, the body was then left brutalized in an easily found location. One attack even happened in front of the planetary parliament that the envoy was speaking to. It happened as they were speaking to the envoy. Only that attacker wasn't even seen. The envoy was in the middle of arguing with the parliament's high minister, when suddenly a window broke inward. The envoy stopped speaking, struck by some phantom force. A small hole appeared in their clothes, right where their heart was, and blood began pouring out. They were dead before they hit the floor. No killer was ever found, but a projectile was. A small piece of titanium-coated lead embedded in the floor behind the dead envoy. We had seen similar projectiles before, but this one couldn't exist. Its existence shouldn't have been possible. Now we knew who our invisible enemy was, but Command wouldn't allow anyone to admit it, Not when we had so obviously wiped them out. Not when we had done so specifically, because we had viewed them as primitive savages, barely capable of interstellar travel. For them to cause such attacks on such a vast scale, it could not happen. Still, planets starved to death. Civilians, envoys, and ships continued to disappear. Tensions within our government rose. Our core ward expansion stalled. We began spreading our net. Supply ships were escorted with full fleets of defensive ships. Envoys and government officials had entire companies of soldiers guarding them. Agricultural worlds had entire small militia armies created and had satellite surveillance deployed en masse to try to even detect the poisoners affecting them. Curfews were put in place for civilians. Nobody was to leave their home after dark. Not unless they were escorted by at least 3 other adults, or had a law enforcement escort. What happened next? It's hard to even comprehend. Surgical strikes against the supply fleets. Small swarms of ships, so small we at first thought they were drones, began destroying the supply ships. Small enough to evade the cannons of the defensive ships. Fast enough to outrun our intercept fighters. Enough firepower to overwhelm shields in single attack runs, and call the ships out on the follow-up. They would warp into system just long enough to destroy the cargo ships. Then, they would disappear back into FTL. Like I said, they were so small that we thought they were drones, but scans showed that each one had one single lifeform piloting it. The G-forces they must have been enduring to move that nimbly, and then to accelerate to warp speed after. No normal lifeform could survive that, not according to our scientists. And our agricultural worlds continued to fester and rot from unseen saboteurs. Even with constant satellite surveillance, no intruders or attacks were ever detected. Civilians continued to disappear, now in larger numbers and more publicly. People could be lost on trips that typically only lasted mere minutes. No place within our empire was safe from these phantoms. Faith in our government began to crumble. Now our government has effectively collapsed. Our militias have turned into war bands, raiding any supplies they can find for themselves. Our fleets have fled our systems to find refuge in systems they consider defensible and settlement-worthy. Our people have practically starved themselves to extinction. Our once glorious empire is now a hollow, rotten shadow of its former self. We will never make it to the core of the galaxy. Our holy dream is dead, slain by an enemy who made themselves known to us only 8 years after these attacks had begun, when they had allowed us to finally see them kill our high priest, Zerna rest their soul. The face that had looked into the lens of our recording drone as they slit the priest's throat was cold and emotionless. That face was human. I don't have long now. My warband, once a proud Sarnassian army battalion, is gone. I am all that was left. They took my last soldier, if you could even call us that anymore, only minutes ago, while he was relieving himself in some bushes. Like always, there was just no trace that he had gone anywhere, but he had. It's just me now. I can hear them out there in the dark. Let this last message find someone. I don't expect that someone to be my species. How could it be? But if someone does find it, if you listen to it, learn from it. I do not know how many humans still exist in the galaxy. We try to destroy them. Don't make that same mistake. Leave them be, or follow us to doom.